Assalamu alaikum and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and thank you for watching Muslim Network TV. That's what we are doing right now. Muslim Network TV, as you know, is on Galaxy 19 satellite, covering the whole United States, east to west, north to south, blue state and red state, and in between everything else. We also cover Canada through satellite, as well as Mexico. We also are available always on our iPhones and Android. You can download our app on just look for Muslim Network TV, either platform, and you can download our app, or you can watch us on OTT platforms like Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku. You can also check out our website, muslimnetwork.tv. So world is constantly changing, but sometimes we feel it is changing more, and sometimes you just are startled by the change. And while we're in pandemic, fear, hate, and anger is not just towards the pandemic and our leaders, but it is all around, and that's also is rising. Gandhi, in India, is just left for ceremonial purposes. Nobody cares for Gandhi there. And the people who killed Gandhi actually are in power. Some of them worship. There are temples around worshiping the killer of Gandhi. Of course, nobody worships Gandhi. His Gandhi ashram is a dusty place. Nobody seems to care for. So what's happening here? And in America, Dr. King's movement of nonviolent and peaceful protest had transformed into louder and a stronger form of protest, which always have element of violence connected with it. Maybe not designed by the organizer, but other people bring that in there. So what's happening there? In the meantime, I got an email, and that email was that Voices of Creative Nonviolence is is closing. And I said, wait a minute, because that is something which I have been familiar with, have learned from, and running, 20-year run with Radio Islam on air in Chicago on the AM radio. Their voices were our voices. And what is happening here? So these were my thought when I decided, well, let's hear from them. Their beautiful experience of working with the victims, standing with them, showing their solidarity, their difficult conversation, how they were perceived around the world, and why in the world are they closing. And to have that discussion with me is Cathy Kelly. Welcome to Muslim Network, Cathy.
Thank you very much for having me, Malik.
Okay. Cathy Kelly is co-founder of Voices in the Wilderness and the Voices of Creative Nonviolence. I met her when it was Voices in the Wilderness. I like the poetic sense of it when the whole Iraq war was going around and nobody was speaking up against that. It really looked Voices in the Wilderness, and Radio Islam was just beginning. So I showed up with my equipment to interview her in their offices. And she lives in solidarity along with the ordinary people. And she has visited more than 30 times Afghanistan as a guest of Afghan peace volunteers. So we'll be talking all about that with her. And thank you so much for being on air while you're concerned about your health at the same time. We pray that you recover quickly and in a lasting manner. And we also have Sarah Bell. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
She's a psychiatric home health nurse working in Chicago, Illinois. And for the last several years, she has been co-coordinator of Voices of Creative Nonviolence. So, well, thank you so much for your work. Why you're ending your work?
Well, it doesn't really seem to me that we're ending our work, but we are changing. I think, resilience seemed like it was called for in this time of pandemic, and also with environmental catastrophe impending, inevitable in many, many ways. We began to question, can we really continue to take long international flights in order to be next to, be near to, listen to friends in other countries who are trapped, are quite trapped, I would say stuck in the middle of these terrible, terrible conflicts, many of which our country is so responsible for. So that occasioned a great deal of thought. We met weekly. We tried to reconsider what our vision would be, what more or less a mission might be, and we sadly agreed that we should close Voices for Creative Nonviolence as a group that would be pledged to live alongside people trapped in war zones, and instead try to, in a sense, drop that international travel component. But we are we're very close to the point where you had met us, as you described years ago. I remember, if you don't mind me telling a quick story, when we told you our name, Aswat Baria, there was a very strong resonance in Iraq with poetry that was about a child out in the wilderness yodeling in the mountain area, and nobody would ever hear the child. And when our Iraqi friends told us that, we said, "Oh, do you think we should change our name?" And they said, "Oh no, that's exactly what you are. You should keep this name." So now we are trying to decide what to name ourselves as we sort of rise up out of this decision to close down the Voices. We'll be sure to disperse everything in our account so that money that's designated for Afghanistan goes there, and we also try to help groups that are working so hard to alleviate suffering in Yemen, and ongoing efforts like that in Afghanistan. But we are going to devise a new way to be a collective.
So Sarah, you joined just a few years ago this particular organization, and what were your motives and what are your feelings that is closing down?
When we first began the conversation 6 months or so ago, I was shocked and dismayed. I suppose that's the only way to put it. But as the conversation developed, I feel like we started to feel a new sense of freedom, that now we were able to do other things, and we had more freedom to collaborate with others, and in a sense, we kind of have the freedom to do and address whatever we wanted. So there's a kind of like a breeze blowing of freshness and hope for the future that I've been feeling as well. I felt that with COVID especially, and just my experience with COVID in the city of Chicago, has been that a lot of peace groups and just people in general have looked around and at first were shocked and dismayed and said, what are we possibly going to do now? And then they started banding together and talking with one another and seeing what could be possible. And suddenly it was kind of like spring. All of this new vegetation sprang up as people had ideas and got together and collaborated. And that was my feeling for the peace groups and the activist groups as well. And Voices started to participate with those in a COVID-friendly way over the last few months. So that's really been quite refreshing. And I think we're all hoping to incorporate this new sense of hope, even as things have gotten worse, as we move into the future.
So it is not necessarily retiring the peace movement, is it?
Not at all.
Okay, that answer came very quickly and spontaneously and in sync with each other. So I like that. I like that. So will you just join any existing organization, or you're thinking of reformulating into another organization?
Well, I'm nervous to be the horse out of the barn, because we really need to collaborate on this. But in my mind, I'm thinking of the phrase, actually, it was Woodrow Wilson who said that World War I would be a war to end all wars. And gosh, that certainly didn't turn out, did it? But that idea to end all wars, it stays with me. And I wonder if we might consider ourselves an alliance to end all wars. And there's no way that we can tackle the very treacherous and threatening problems we now face unless we come to grips with dismantling the United States militarism. And that's, of course, a huge, huge task, and it requires enormous education. But I don't think that the difficulty of it excuses us from trying.
So, Sarah, were you always a peace activist, or it was a recent participation on your behalf?
It came upon me quite suddenly, looking back over my life. For a long time, for most of my life, I wasn't political at all, and to be quite frank, I just ignored all of that. I thought, well, I like to study, and I like to read books, and I like to do this, that, and the other. And then there are all those other people waving signs on the side of the street. That's honestly how I thought of it. And I've often found in my life that it's not argument that persuades people most of the time. It's actions and demonstrations of love. And I feel like that is what happened to me. So when I moved to Chicago about 9 years ago, I started looking into volunteering opportunities, and I looked into the Catholic worker movement and various things. And one thing led to another, and I found out about Cathy, who invited me over to dinner. And I was suddenly, for the first time, surrounded by all these people who were just doing these really neat things with humility and love and care and thoughtfulness. And I was just knocked out by it. And that's what got me interested in activism. It wasn't arguments or learning about world news per se. That came afterwards. It was about meeting people who were living the life that they thought they should live.
So, one question I have, Cathy, with you, that how many people during this period have you trained to carry on, to adopt the mission which you have, and to carry on those things?
Oh, that word training, it sounds a bit misleading sometimes to me, because I can certainly identify with what Sarah just said, but the idea of bringing people into some kind of formal training, I think happened more, perhaps I could say organically. We would put out the call saying, if people would like to be part of a delegation, we are forming a group that's going to go to Iraq, for instance, to break the economic sanctions. And the risks were quite high. And I think that in a way, the risks were the training, because people had to really consult with themselves. Am I willing to risk 12 years in prison, a $1 million fine, a $250,000 administrative penalty, disapproval from my loved ones and friends? Why in the world are you going to Iraq? Getting to Iraq and possibly finding that the circumstances might be overwhelming. There were many, many, many questions which people then had to join in interrogating themselves about and one another, and to do it in a way that built community, that didn't fracture community. So the training was in the doing. I guess 70 delegations ultimately went to Iraq with Voices in the Wilderness, and then we sort of morphed into the Iraq peace team when we realized a new invasion was coming. There just was no way to deny the inevitability of a new attack against Iraq by 2002. So in August of 2002, we began to ask the Iraqi authorities, how about we just stay here? Because before we would go and stay for 2 weeks and leave and come back. And they said, okay. And then we began to recruit people. And our bar was pretty high. We didn't want people to join us unless they'd had some pretty substantial experience of either being in a war zone, or we accepted having been in prison, because we thought that people learned how they handled high stress in that situation. And so we did assemble quite an amazing group of people, many of them people who had already risked their lives and altered their lives because of not being willing to comply with wars. Many people had lowered their salary beneath the taxable income, so they worked in very humble jobs. I remember one time an Iraqi friend was just so puzzled after meeting dozens and dozens of voice activists, and he said, "Please help me understand what is so important in your country about being a baker or a janitor." And those were the people that we often were traveling with, people who were quite well educated, and sometimes dazzling in their repertoire of ideas and thoughts and capacities, but working as bakers and janitors and caregivers and some of the finest people in the world, really. But we met unquestionably again and again in all these various war zones, many of the finest people in the world. And I'm sad to say, many of them children and teenagers, and they couldn't escape.
So the experience is the training here. Was the, visiting those war zone was, say, about 80% of the work of Voices?
Oh, I think the real work was what happened upon return. Most people that I've known have kind of hit the ground running in whatever way best enables them to speak and write and reach out. But people would be so aware that they carried with them the questions, the statements of people whose voices might otherwise not be heard. They should have been heard. They should have been able to speak for themselves within every kind of media all across the United States, but that's not what was happening. With regard to Iraq, many people felt there was only one person living in the whole country, Saddam Hussein. So people worked hard to build education. And I actually think across the United States prior to the 2003 invasion, there was a remarkable level of education accomplished outside the mainstream media. You yourself, Malik, were responsible for a great deal of it. The mainstream media wasn't giving people information about Iraqis, but people knew. People knew about the economic sanctions and about the children, and that's why you saw in the United States and in Europe and all around the world the largest demonstrations that had ever been organized to try and stop a war before it started.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adam. You remember me. I appeared in so many episodes that Sound Vision has put on the market. No matter what. Hey, what's happening? Hey, oh, Sorry, lockdown is what it is. Well, continuing here. In this lockdown, Sound Vision never stops thinking about you, the viewer. We'll have to get back into production again, online and inline. Everybody in their own space, even me. Although I'm stuck with Lanisa.
Salam! Salam! Salam!
I know, you were shocked too. Well, let me continue. This is what I was going to say. Salam! 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 Cut! Finally, I get my own screen time again. Thank God. And so we invested in new equipment to bring you even better production with new songs and new singers and animations. Well, here are a few clips. And Sound Vision has brought all this into your home, making Islamic values and teachings easy. And if you know me, Adam, a multi-talented actor, well, sometimes I'm an actor and the reporter and the... Oh, that's enough. Let's move on to the next section. Well, you can watch these new episodes on our new app at www.adamsworldapp.com. We have previews happening every day on Muslim Network TV.
Sound Vision has been serving generations, moving and changing with the times. We are all faithfully connected. That is a huge blessing. Your donation helps keep these programs available now and into the future. We take this job of helping tomorrow's Muslims today seriously, and you should too. Today, we need your help. Children absorb and learn from everything they encounter. Make that wholesome, positive, grounded in our faith. Together, we can accomplish our goal of raising better Muslims, better neighbors, and better citizens. Please donate generously. It's an investment in our future.
To finish, let me tell you, there are new scripts of my new mission. And it is something that I enjoy talking about. My new mission is space. Houston, we do not have a problem. Salam, see you soon.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Cathy Kelly and Sarah Bell of Voices of Creative Nonviolence, which is going to become something else and continue work in other means. Tell me, Sarah, I mean, Cathy has been a veteran of visiting Afghanistan. By now, she should be their foreign minister or something. How many times have you visited?
I visited twice. I visited last October, a little more than a year ago, and then I visited 2 years prior to that, I believe.
Okay. So tell us about, I mean, drone attacks have been, probably all the drone technology has been improved by trying to hit Afghans. I don't think there is any other country, to my knowledge, which has been so much subject to drone attacks. So, and then I think somebody, either Code Pink or I don't know who, brought a family to the US. And there were children and father, I think mother was killed through drones. And I heard what type of trauma children go through. So since you have the background of dealing with people who have mental health issues, what did you observe or what did you learn from them?
I'll first say that on my second visit to Kabul, I noticed that there was just a general feeling of tension in the air, much more so than it had been 2 years previously. And it's hard to say what exactly gave me that feeling, but everybody seemed to be a little bit more on edge. There were more people who were affected in their daily lives by what was going on. So I did notice that. But the second thing that I'll say is that on going over, the first thing you notice is the warmth and hospitality. And at first I was thrown a little bit, and I asked several people, I said, I've found nothing here but love and warmth and hospitality, and yet you have terrible things happening to you every day. So how does this work? And I started to notice that there did seem to be an underlying anxiety with everybody that revealed itself a little bit more and more as I spent more time with them. And I usually spend about 6 days there. One of the things you notice right when you go over is that almost every single person that you talk to has been directly affected. So every other person you meet will be a refugee from a distant province, or somebody will say, oh, my cousin was killed in a bombing earlier this week in Kabul. And it's almost as if every single person you meet has something like that. And I found that for myself, it's helpful to do a kind of a translation exercise, as I think of it. So I'll think, well, what if I, sitting in Chicago right now, just had the library I go to every week bombed? And probably the librarians that I know very well, they might have been killed and the books would be gone and I would no longer be able to go. And then I'll pick a distant suburb and say, Des Plaines, Illinois has been bombed and I have a relative there. So how would I feel if, not only if that were happening recently, but if that were happening every single day for decades, really? I found that it's really important to do that exercise because it's very easy to say, oh, well, they just have, people over there just have horrible things happening to them every day. One of the things that I've put together, that I've made a link to in my own work with people who have severe mental health issues in the inner city in Chicago, is that it's one of the most harmful things is when people don't feel like they have anything, any investment in life and nothing that they can do. And I think of a term that called responsables, I hope I pronounced that right, that I think was used by the Zapatistas in Mexico, that I got at a conference last year. And the responsables, as far as I understand it, are those who are responsible for something. So the Zapatistas decided that every individual person needs to have something to care for and something to do so that they can be valuable as they indeed are. And I feel like Afghanistan today, with its extremely high unemployment rate and the need to stay in the house because there might be bombings, and the feeling of futility is very strong. So just as in the people with severe mental illnesses in inner city Chicago who just sit in their house and are hearing voices and don't have anything, any work to claim as their own, the link for me is that they need something to be responsible for. And I believe that every single person can have something to be responsible for, and that needs to be cultivated and given. And that is something that the Afghan peace volunteers that Voices often stayed with did. Every single person had a province of their own that they could develop. And in terms of mental health, I really think that is one of the most important things. Your back is no longer against a wall because you have an activity of your own that is valuable.
Cathy, have you informed volunteers in Afghanistan that your organization is disbanding itself?
Well, these have been some very touching and difficult conversations, yes. They were gracious to a fault, thanked us for the 10 years of our involvement, and said that they hoped that friendships would not end. And that's certainly our hope as well. And what Sarah has described says, I think, very thoroughly what is so valuable about the Afghan peace volunteers, that they felt purposeful, that their community was built on teams. They have 19 different teams acting collaboratively and collectively together. And I don't think that will end. They are certainly affected by COVID also, and have had to shut down the kind of rollicking street kids school that was so life-giving. But they are hoping to continue the rations that were given to each of 100 families that were worked out as kind of a way to help draw the families to send their children over to this school. And they have very, very creative ideas. They're working hard on distributing solar-powered batteries to families, on learning about permaculture, on being able to bring more young people into their center. So I have a great deal of ongoing hope for them. But for instance, just over the weekend, they have an international phone call that they do every month. And as they gathered for the call, word came that in these terrible rocket attacks, there was a barrage of attacks in Kabul launched by an insurgent group, and the family home of relatives of one of the young people was hit. And all I know at this point is that no one survived that attack inside the home. But the young volunteer herself, Fareshta, is the person with whom, along with 3 others, I was in communication quite recently, trying to explain that Voices had decided to change. So it wasn't an easy conversation, but they certainly didn't make it more difficult.
Sarah, I learned what you just described, people being responsible for something. It helps them with the pressures, mental health related issues which they're dealing with. I was invited to speak in a mental health conference. I mean, Muslims have so many mental health challenges. There is now a Journal of Muslim Mental Health, and there are annual conferences. And I told them, I'm not in this field. I'm not an expert by any imagination. I don't practice. I haven't studied mental health issues. So the person persuading me was a professor at Harvard. He's a psychiatrist and psychologist now. Both fields seems to be separate, but he is in both. And he said, no, what you do is you engage people before they need professional help. And that is very important for this, engaging people and this engagement. So he mentioned several of our programs which we have. And he said, that's the reason I want you to come. And he persuaded me. And I did go and attend and talk to people about what we do. And there is a saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that each person is responsible. Exactly, this wording is in there. You're responsible for this, and then said the other person responsible for that. So that I think connected well with me, what you gave with the experience of Zapistas. And I will try to learn that word which you told me, but it makes a perfect sense. Cathy, now that you're probably syncing your plans with the Defense Department, Pentagon, because they're withdrawing from Afghanistan, you're withdrawing from Afghanistan, and so that is a ironical coincidence for me. But tell me, when how will we? For peace movement people like you and I and Sarah, this whole engagement with Taliban and a dialogue, on one side, you feel comforted. It means that maybe war will be coming to an end. But at the same time, you're weary of the type of things they are known, which they have done. So these peacemakers and volunteers in Afghanistan, they probably have the type of feeling which Sarah noticed in her last visit last October, that there is a more tense and more anxiety and more concern than in terms of comfort. So in this area, what are you hearing and thinking?
Well, there's a professor that's a new person in my life. His name is Dr. Zahir Wahab, and he's Afghan. And he felt that he had to give back to his country after 2001. So by 2003, even though he'd spent 4 decades teaching at Lewis and Clark College in Oregon, he started to go back to Afghanistan once a year to help with rebuilding the Ministry of Education. And then 6 years ago, he and his wife moved there, and he worked there full time. And he tried his best to stay, but he said he felt like before COVID started, he certainly understood lockdown because he couldn't go anywhere without being in an armored car with an accompanying vehicle. And he said the life in Kabul had become unlivable. So he and his spouse have moved back to the United States. And he gave a very, very compelling reflection. And he calls for demilitarization. He's not saying we need the military in Afghanistan to protect people, but he is saying that there should right now be a fund established that would funnel billions of dollars into Afghanistan for reconstruction and let that equal the billions, I think we actually are approaching $1 trillion that has been spent on United States war in Afghanistan. And he said that there should be a peacekeeping force. Now, I would prefer myself to see that be a presence that goes in multinationally without armored vehicles and without weapons. But I'm well aware that when the United Nations sets up a peacekeeping force, they don't go in without weapons. But he says that force should not be comprised of NATO countries, Western countries, countries that have already in the last 20 years wreaked so much havoc and really accomplished so little in Afghanistan. And then he also says that every country that's been involved, and they are many, I mean, it's the United States and the UK primarily, but, it's almost as though all these different countries have their own Talibs, their own Taliban, whether you're thinking of China or Pakistan or Australia. The countries like Canada, New Zealand, Jordan, what's their interest in Afghanistan? Well, one thing they can do is clean up the weapons that have been strewn all across that land. And you know that when quakes and floods come, those buried weapons start to move and they become dangerous for decades. And Afghanistan has already suffered so much. So there ought to be every form of action to create reparations for the suffering caused. But we don't hear a word of that. The House Armed Services Committee met last week, and one after another person said, we can't leave. Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, said, we can't leave. We have to continue this militarization. Well, what has it accomplished? Save the Children just issued staggering statistics this morning about Afghanistan having the highest number of children maimed and killed in any conflict in the world. And since 2005, that number has been 25,075 children.
You're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Cathy Kelly and Sarah Bell about war, peace, and we'll be right back after these messages.
My wife, who she's a professor at the University of Cincinnati, who's Catholic, and by her watching and listening to our 3-year-old son watch Adam's World, she ended up taking Kalima Shahada. She embraced Islam because she learned so much about Islam and the other prophets. It really affected our life in a great way, and because of Sound Vision and Adam's World, we're Muslims.
I took my Shahada 15 years ago, and I actually am from a rural part of Ohio. And so I found the catalog for Sound Vision, and I ordered the the tapes and the CDs and the books, and I use those, and especially for my little daughter, that's how we basically learned our Islam, and Islam entered our hearts through the wonderful works of Sound Vision.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, brother. I just want you to know that I love the Sound Vision website, that a lot of times when I'm looking for information, especially as it relates to homelessness, domestic violence, and women issues, I go to that website, and then I see what you've written, and then I copy and paste it and spread the word, because the wisdom is there. So I can't do any better than what Sound Vision has already done.
Sound Vision is our survival guide. It is the organization that provides skills for Muslims how to survive and thrive in this community here in the U.S.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Anam, I'm in 11th grade, and I grew up with Adam's World, and what it taught me was unity, respect, and love for the Muslim Ummah.
Adam's World is the greatest show ever made. Take me to the Kaaba, man. I love that puppet.
Assalamu alaikum! Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Cathy Kelly and Sarah Bell. What may be their last interview as leaders and coordinators of Voices of Creative Nonviolence. Cathy, you told me that a Pakistani took you to an American base, which was just 20 miles away from where they killed Osama bin Laden. And then he got arrested. And do you know any idea what happened to that person?
Do you know, I remember that there was a person who taught music in Abbottabad and had told us about the nearness of that base. Malik, I'm sorry, I didn't know that he himself was arrested, or if I did, so many things sometimes crowd in. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, he took you there, and later on, when you came back into the U.S., you learned that he has been arrested by Pakistanis for leading you to that particular base. That base is, is the place where John Kerry distributed relief supplies when there was earthquake in that, or flood was in that particular area. So maybe there are so many incidents or so many human beings you have dealt with, and these things come and go. Let's talk a little bit about the difficult dialogue. I mean, dialogue with Taliban, with the U.S. government, they have come to some conclusions. Has there been any effort on the part of the peace groups which you work in Afghanistan? So they are in dialogue with Taliban, and so civil society also is talking with them, especially on the issues on women's rights and their previous effort to destroy girls' schools. I mean, now they, in their manifesto, they have changed that they guarantee women education and all that. But is there any dialogue, difficult dialogue with those people?
Sarah, do you want to talk about your experiences when you had conversations in the garden with Khalid?
I'm sorry, Cathy, in the garden with who?
With Muhammad Khalid?
Yes. Yes. Our friend is a young man, around 20, who comes from a very fraught area of Afghanistan, Maidan Vardak. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And it's an area where there's simply no way to avoid the Taliban. And indeed, as he told us, in your own families, sometimes different generations some will be a Talib and some will not, which of course causes a lot of dissension. And it's an area where there are Afghan forces around, but usually they're controlled by the Talib. So there's simply no avoiding it. The Talib come into your house, they ask for certain things, they leave. If you look or dress a certain way, they might suspect you of being a university student, which is a very bad thing to be in the eyes of the Taliban. So you simply can't escape those conversations because they're right around you all of the time. And he himself, because of family obligations, can't just leave the region. We visited with him in Kabul, and he told us, after telling us this long history of how the Taliban had put IEDs all along the road to Maidan Vardak and so forth, and how it was getting more and more dangerous, and everybody is armed simply because most people feel that there's no other option. He kind of mentioned almost as an afterthought that his sister was getting married, so he had to go back to Maidan Vardak on this long IED-mined road in the next couple of weeks, and there was simply no way out. So for a lot of people, there's no way to avoid conversations. I know that I feel like it's popular to say in the US recently, well, we can't dialogue with so-and-so, or don't engage. But for a lot of people, that's not an option. And I've noticed that in the past couple of years here in the United States, at least, that people are starting to believe anything at all. And it's very easy to fall into patterns of belief, just as I imagine it's easy if you're surrounded by people who are in the Taliban to believe what they say. And I think we're all discovering that people are a little bit less based in rationality than we had previously thought, which is where acting in love and treating everyone as a brother and sister comes in. And this was something that the young man that Cathy and I spoke to, Khalid, was really embodying. And he was starting an abolish war team in the middle of all this, with everybody being armed to the teeth, with having to travel this very dangerous IED-mined road. He was continuing the most difficult dialogue about war while being surrounded by war. And I think for a lot of people in the Afghan peace volunteers, they see that there's no other option. We have to talk about these things. We have to live these things. So there's no avoiding any of it. And I think that's quite true for us in the US as well, but perhaps we just haven't realized that yet, that we can't avoid anything because, as I think somebody said, you can be an individual and be doing all right, but if the world is burning around you, you're not doing all right. So in the US, we have this illusion that we can avoid things, but really, we can't. We're in it already.
Cathy, you have gone to Gaza multiple times. Was there any opportunity to have conversation with the settlers who internationally are considered illegal Jewish settlers to Palestinian land? Were you able to talk to some of them?
Inside of Gaza, no. I had made one trip to the Jenin camp, and this was a refugee camp. It was populated by people who had already been bombed out of their homes and uprooted from their land, and they were then being bombed in the refugee camp. And so a number of us were on a high hill about 13 miles above the camp, and we thought, well, we should at least try to go down there. We just have to try. So we asked the woman giving us hospitality, could we please have your broom and a pillowcase? And we tied a pillowcase to the broom pole, and we started our trek down the high hillside. We didn't talk to settlers, but we talked with one after another group of Israeli soldiers. And it was remarkable. Each time we were able to talk them into pointing us, and we had no idea which way to go even, and telling us, well, if you cross over that onion patch and then go through those 2 tomato fields, you'll pick up the road again. And how did we talk our way through these checkpoints? Well, it was by talking about, it was sort of by being responsables, I suppose. We talked about literature. I would do the literature, Scott Schaefer Duffy would do scripture, and Jeff Gunsel would do pop music. And we managed to talk our way through checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint until there we were in the Jenin camp. And the next morning we thought, well, time to go out again. And that was when we met an entirely different situation. We ended up trying to help get an asthmatic woman with a serious heart condition who was in a house that had already been bombed, and her family members literally fed her through an opening. And we took her, it was like they were carrying a sack of potatoes, and Jeff and our other friends said, she's too heavy, we can't manage, go get a stretcher. So I went peeling off in the direction that I thought was toward a clinic, and I was stopped again by Israeli soldiers, and the high school study teacher and me just came to the fore, and I said, put those guns down now. And they did. And I said, and tell me which entrance is open so I can enter that clinic. And they told me, and so I'm running off. Came back with the stretcher on my head, reached my friend Jeff and Andre, who had the elderly woman who is absolutely terrified. She's separated from her family. She knows she's very ill. She's on a rocky road. But I noticed that Jeff was waving his blue passport above his head and trying to shelter the woman. And on the second floor of an apartment above, Israeli soldiers, maybe friends, maybe relatives of these very dear young men and women that had let us talk our way through the checkpoints, that had just pointed me toward the clinic. They're throwing plates and glasses down on the old woman. This is what war does. It so confuses people, disjoints them, takes them away from who they might really truly be. It is a hideous, traumatizing factor in the lives of so many people. And so when I see young Gazans, young Afghans trying their best to be responsible, to find some way of living that doesn't involve picking up a gun, learning how to use a gun, and it's only out of desperation, I believe, that people in war zones who are the victims move in that direction. But then I have to ask myself, well, what about here in the United States, where people take jobs working for Lockheed Martin, for Boeing, for Raytheon, for General Dynamics. They build the ships that are being used by the Saudis right now. For instance, in Marinette, Wisconsin, people say, well, I have to have a job. So there is a consonance, isn't there, between what happens in the war zones and what happens in our beleaguered economic realities here.
One of the things, Cathy, as we're coming to the last 5 minutes of our show, I want us to talk a little bit about ourselves, America. We talked about everything else. The dialogue here is becoming difficult in America between conservatives and liberals and progressive and militias and all that. So I hope when you have menu of choices, what we'll be doing in future, I think this should also be a part of it. How do we develop difficult conversation within the United States? I remember, and I was doing a program in Dallas, and somehow somebody started a conspiracy theory or something that I'm bringing hundreds of buses from across the country to Dallas. I didn't have a single bus. There were neighbors, 900 neighbors who were attending my program. And it, so several hundred people along with guns. That was 5 years ago. They showed up and we have to inform police, and it was strange. But considering now, people are buying guns as they were buying toilet papers before, in the beginning of pandemic. So conversation here is important, but here comes our new government. President-elect Biden has announced a person as Secretary of State. And that person, Biden himself was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when Iraq war was about to begin. And he didn't, and this person was the Democratic main staffer assisting him in that time. And they didn't let many peace voices of the experts who knew Middle East, and they were part and parcel of, as the war in Iraq was beginning. So how the peace movement should enter in conversation with the democratic institutions, or do you think this is worth your effort? Because you have been standing with the victims. You have not been trying to persuade people who are pushing for those type of policies which gets us into war.
Well, I do believe education, and we must continually uphold the dignity of every person. But this is a crucial time to insist that war is not the answer. It's been futile. It hasn't worked. It's bankrupting our country. It's true that the new administration is showing many signs of an extremely hawkish position with regard to wars. And I think they are refusing to level with the US public. And we have to press President-elect Biden to level with the US public about what he's up against, because we've got mafiosas and warlords in this country that are manipulating and exercising tremendous leverage over every single government official in this country. I'm going to name them again: Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, General Dynamics. These huge lobbying groups have a vice-like grip in the military-industrial complex in the United States. And two dates I want to especially emphasize: January 22nd, there should be dancing in the streets. Ratification of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That's one way that gives us a chance internationally to say we're not going to continue to be the outliers. We're not the ones breaking the law. It's the United States with its nuclear arsenal.
So is January, what date you said?
January 22nd. That will be the day when the 84 signers and 50 countries, Honduras being the last one, that have endorsed, have ratified the treaty. That's what was required, and then 3 months, and now on January 22nd.
So is there a website, Cathy, for that?
Yes, the ICANN website, ICANW.
ICANW, okay. So Sarah, I mean, you professionally, deal with people who have difficulties, communication difficulties, and I don't know if that it will be appropriate for me to say the mental health patient nursing them is something difficult. But here, the whole country seems to be at a difficult movement, and Cathy thinks it's education, education, and education. So how will you be pursuing educating people who are difficult to talk with?
That's an excellent question. I drove to Pennsylvania a couple of weeks ago. It was a 14-hour-long drive, and I tried to listen to a lot of right-wing talk radio on the way to see what people were saying. And I did a little psychological experiment where I tried to pretend as if I already believed all of that. And it seemed to me that it was very easy to suddenly believe and participate in everything that was being said. It's so easy to fall into a certain line of thought and stick with it, and so hard to find out what the truth is and to educate. I'm reminded right now that one of the things that I most loved doing with Voices was the peace walks, which of course are no longer possible with COVID. But Cathy introduced me to walking, dozens, sometimes 100 or so miles across often quite desolate territory in the middle of nowhere in the United States. From the most recent one was with the Kings Bay Plowshares, from Savannah to Kings Bay to protest nuclear weapons. And the thing that was really wonderful about it for me was that it was completely egalitarian, and that you never know who you might end up conversing with on the way. And I think some people might think, well, you're kind of wasting your time walking along a road in the middle of nowhere, running into farmers and talking with just people who have no say in anything. And yet, I feel like in terms of education, this reaching out in egalitarianism and saying, you, like me, are somebody worth talking to, and I want to hear what you have to say, that is really the vital part where people can be reached. And I think it's showing respect for people and saying, tell me what you have to say, because I think a lot of people in this country don't get respect for a variety of reasons. They don't have jobs, they don't have health insurance, they don't have anything. They're just left on the side of the road. So engaging with people, listening to what they have to say, and beginning a dialogue, I think is essential to beginning the process of education. And
Thank you.
Voices
Thank you
taught
so
me
much.
that, and I think it's so important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Cathy Kelly, and thank you so much, Sarah Bell, for spending a good amount of your time helping our audience understand the work which you do. We wish you the best to continue your peacemaking work. I think if America can talk with each other, I hope we can have difficult conversations around the world. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Roku, as well as on your own iPhone and Android. You can download Muslim Network TV app, and you can watch from there. And our website is muslimnetwork.tv. Peace. Salam.